Minister, welcome to the House for this adjournment. I've tabled this debate today because I know that the Department of Children and Youth Affairs is currently considering proposals from the City of Dublin Youth Services Board in relation to the funding for youth work services announced in the last budget. And I wanted to draw your attention to the devastating impact that those cuts will have on youth services and to ask you to reconsider them. The Youth Work Service provides an invaluable service to young people in general, but more particularly in disadvantaged areas. For a very small amount of investment, as I'm sure you know, they can have a huge impact. We only spend in this country €4 per week per young person who's served by a youth service. But the Indicon report that was published last year, the Indicon did an economic assessment of the sector, showed that for every euro that we invest, the state saves over €2 in the long term. So I think the figures are there both in terms of, obviously there's a huge social impact and a very positive impact on young people who are served by these services, but also the figures are there to show that economically it makes sense to invest in youth work because it saves the state more money in the long term. And I think it's important to remember that as well, for every paid member of staff who's working in a youth service, there's dozens of volunteers. But you have to have the paid staff to be able to actually leverage the volunteers and to manage them and train them. And particularly in this day and age when there's been such a move in the sector as well towards greater professionalisation over the last few years and making sure that staff are trained and that they're delivering a quality service. And I know that from the services in my own area, they've put a huge emphasis as well on reviewing the services that they're providing and doing needs analysis and things like that. And the whole sector has really got so much more professionalised over the last few years. But they're already struggling in relation to cuts that they've had to suffer to date. And over the last few years, there's been huge cuts across the sector. Initially, groups and services tried to respond as best they could by trying to kind of rationalise, do more with less. But they've had to cut hours and they've had to cut staff, and increasingly over the last year or two, they've had to cut programmes. And that means that there's young people that aren't now being served by a service that were before. And I just know from my own area in terms of services that are provided in places like Darndale, Cabarrick, Kilmore West, Donacarney, Coolock, some of the most disadvantaged parts of the country, and the impact that they have on those young people, in the same with St Monica's in Edenmore and the Trinity service in Donamead. I've seen the impact that they have in terms of the confidence of young people. Often young people who've left school already and are out of education and training and their needs aren't being met by the state and other sectors. But young people who are at risk of leaving school area or from disadvantaged areas and often don't have the confidence in themselves or the self-esteem to take up the opportunities that are available to them. And I've seen how through youth services and through youth work, people, the staff and the volunteers involved in those services have been able to really boost the self-esteem of young people involved and their confidence and get them to actually take up formal education and to apply for jobs and to have confidence in themselves to take up other opportunities. I just think it's such a shame to be cutting this area, particularly at this time when there's so many problems in terms of unemployment, particularly amongst young people. Our rate of youth unemployment is shockingly high. And I appreciate that there are cuts that have to be made. I understand that the government has to make savings somewhere. But I think that cutting this area, particularly on the foot of the Indicon report and all the research that's there that shows that it saves more money in the long term, I think is particularly short-sighted. And I would ask you, at the minute, services they haven't been told yet exactly how much they're going to lose. There's a lot of speculation and a huge amount of fear. The figures have been rumoured at between 2% and 14% in North Dublin. I'm not sure if you can confirm that. But those kind of figures, and particularly at the upper end of that scale, I mean, 14% is the loss of a member of staff for a lot of these services. It's not being able to offer a programme in a couple of months' time that at the minute is serving young people that badly need it. So I would ask you to reconsider them and to find the savings elsewhere, because I think both the social and the economic case is there for doing that, and there's no doubt that they will have a devastating impact on youth work services.
Senator Minister Kieran Cannon.
I welcome this opportunity to address the issue, and I want to thank Senator Power for raising it. Some 53.173 million is being provided in 2013 by the Department of Children and Youth Affairs to support the delivery of a range of youth work programmes and youth services for all young people, including those from disadvantaged communities, by the voluntary youth work sector. Youth work programmes and youth services are delivered to some 400,000 young people by over 1,400 youth work personnel, who in turn support a large volunteer base of some 40,000 people. However, like all areas of the public sector, the Department of Children and Youth Affairs has had to find savings as part of its collective government, collective government effort to reduce our unsustainable day-to-day deficit. The Comprehensive Review of Expenditure, or CRE, published in December 2011, sets out clearly the savings required from the Department in each of 2012, 2013 and 2014. The review, which is available on the Department of Public Expenditure website, contains a detailed 7-page chapter outlining savings required from youth work funding schemes. The overall level of savings required under the CRE in respect of 2013 amounts to nearly 10%. The funding allocations for 2013 were notified to the administering bodies in recent weeks. In the course of the past few months, Minister Fitzgerald, along with officials from her department, have met with representatives of the youth sector with a review to determining how best to minimise the impact of the reduction in the 2013 budget on youth services in the challenging budgetary situation that we face at this point in time. Administering bodies have been advised to consider salary levels, conditions and administrative costs across the projects and services if these have not already been addressed. Every effort is being made to safeguard as far as possible frontline youth services and services for the most vulnerable young people. And in order to try and maximise the use of funding available for youth services and programmes, the Department has afforded flexibility to the local grant administering bodies, normally VECs, to propose the reconfiguration of the allocations provided, having regard to the knowledge available to these bodies about the needs of young people at local level. And it's within that context that last week the City of Dublin Youth Service Board, CDYSB, as the local grant administering body in the Dublin City area, submitted a proposal to the Department requesting that percentage reductions different to those outlined in the CRE would be applied to the projects in the Dublin City area. CDYSB's proposed rationale is to seek to minimise disruption to frontline youth provision and to protect smaller projects. It should also be noted that under the CDYSB proposals, the majority of projects would receive a significantly lower reduction. However, CDYSB has also proposed that some larger projects would receive greater reductions. The Department is currently examining the CDYSB's proposals, and at Minister Fitzgerald's request, officials of her department met with CDYSB last Friday to discuss the proposals. The Department will advise the CDYSB of the outcome very, very shortly. It should also be noted that under the CRE, there has been no cut to the funding being provided to support voluntary youth clubs. This modest funding, in excess of €1 million, plays an important role in supporting volunteer-led youth groups and in promoting and leveraging valuable voluntary activity in youth work. In relation to the €1.5 million in capital funding being provided in 2013 for youth cafes and youth projects, the Department will be announcing further details of the application process for those 2013 funding programmes very shortly. And this follows on from the funding of €500,000 which was provided in 2012 for the development of a number of youth cafes which had applied for previous youth cafe funding schemes. With respect to future funding provision, the Department has commenced a comprehensive value for money review of youth funding, and the outcome of that is expected by mid-year. The Department has also prioritised the improvement of quality provision in youth work through publication and ongoing implementation of a national quality standards framework for youth work. The Department has also developed national quality standards for volunteer-led youth groups, which were launched by Minister Fitzgerald on Monday of this week.
Senator Power.
Minister, I know that you've said that the Department is currently considering the proposals that have been sent in by the City of Dublin Youth Service Board. As I said, the reason I've tabled this debate is to ask that in that context that the whole approach will be reconsidered, because I think one of the problems you've said that some projects will be cut more than others. Essentially, it's put the VCs and the Youth Services Board in the invidious position of trying to choose between equally worthy initiatives, all serving as the projects that I mentioned to you. And I'd invite you to visit them, and I'd invite the Minister for Children to visit these projects and see the work that they're doing in communities that struggled for a long time. And it took a lot of work to get these projects off the ground and get them to the position of strength that they built up over the last few years before the succession of funding cuts have been put in place. So I think it's unfair to then have projects pitted against each other, whereby you're saying it'll be good for the small projects if they get less of a cut, but then you've got big services like Sphere 17 in Darndale, who, as I understand, were one of the biggest projects in our area. So by the rationale that you've set out, will suffer severe cuts, and yet they're serving an area that's one of the most disadvantaged in the entire country. And I just think that's an impossible choice for anybody who's been asked for the Youth Services Board to make, in terms of weighing up the merits of all of these projects, each of which in their own right deserve to maintain their support. So I'd again just urge you to reconsider the whole approach to it, and I would invite yourself or invite the Minister out to visit these projects and see for yourself the work that they're doing in those areas and the difference that they're making, and the amount of money that they're saving the state in other areas.
No, that's a nice invitation, Minister. So.
Perhaps they'll be able to take you up on that invitation at some point in the future, but certainly like to do so. What Minister Fitzgerald is doing here is engaging actively with the providers of the youth services in each area, and indeed the entity that is responsible for the overall administration. She's obliged to find a 10% saving in her 2013 budget. If she hadn't carried out this engagement, she would have been described as dictatorial and irresponsible, and not having, by having carried it out, you're somehow implying that she's pitting one service against another. I genuinely don't think that was her intention, or that is the actual outcome of the engagement. She's seeking to, I suppose, use the wisdom and the experience of the CDYSB in administering services across the City of Dublin in determining how exactly we implement this saving across the whole sector to minimise the impact on the frontline services. That engagement, I think, will prove fruitful. I think it's important that it was had. I don't think there's any negatives associated with that engagement, and I do think that the outcome of the engagement will be available quite shortly. And I do think, with the cooperation and the collaboration of the CDYSB, we will succeed in minimising as best we can the negative impact of this saving in 2013.
Minister, this House stands adjourned until Tuesday the 12th.